Have you ever seen a beautiful home online and thought, what are they doing that I'm not? Well, when this happens, it's often for the same 4 reasons. So today, I'm going to show you what those reasons are. I'm going to walk you through the mistakes you're making that cause your home to feel less inviting than it could. And at the end, I'm going to show you how to use this knowledge to make your place finally feel like home. So this first mistake is one most people don't even realize they're making, which is ignoring the rule of 3. Because great rooms almost always work in 3s. A well-designed room usually has 3 clear visual anchors working together. And if your room only has 1 or 2, there's a good chance it feels flat. Not bad, not obviously wrong, just unfinished. Think about a living room. One anchor is almost always the seating area, the sofa or the chairs. That's the functional core of the room. And a second anchor is usually a light source, a floor lamp, a table lamp, or a window that gives the room atmosphere and direction. And the third anchor is something that gives the space visual weight, like a rug, a large piece of art, or some other kind of architectural feature. When all 3 are present and working together, the room feels complete. Nothing is screaming for attention, but nothing feels missing either. But if you were to remove even just one of those elements, the room would change significantly. For example, take the same room and remove the rug. Everything is still technically there, but the floor suddenly feels empty. The furniture now looks like it's floating, and the room feels colder even if you can't quite explain why. Now add the rug back in, but remove the windows. Suddenly the room feels smaller, more enclosed. It starts to feel like a tucked away corner instead of a place people naturally want to gather and spend time. And if you remove the couch, it's not really a living room anymore. It's just a partially furnished space with no clear purpose. The room loses its identity. And this is the difference between a room with 2 anchors and a room with 3. 2 can technically function, but 3 feels designed. And this is exactly why learning the principles of design before making big changes to your space matters so much. Because a huge part of why your home doesn't look the way you want it to comes down to things you don't even know to look for. If you didn't know a rug was doing that much work in this living room, you could easily live without one for years, thinking the space just isn't great, or blaming the layout, the size, or the furniture. But once you see the room with the rug, something clicks. You finally understand what the space was missing and what it's actually capable of. And that's a big part of the reason I've spent so much time building tools and frameworks that let you visualize your space before you spend any money on furniture or upgrades. Because seeing is half the battle. So if you want to get access to those tools so you can upload photos of your own home and see how it would look using interior design best practices, there's a link in the description. But I've got to be honest, not every room naturally breaks into neat layers. Small apartments, narrow rooms, awkward layouts, these don't always give you 3 obvious anchors. But that doesn't mean the rule of 3 disappears. It just changes form. In these cases, instead of anchors, think in points of interest. You want at least 3 elements that give the eye somewhere to move. For example, a chair with presence, a light creating atmosphere, and a texture or material that adds some weight to the space. So a simple bedroom might not have much architectural depth, but you can still create 3 points of interest: the bed itself, an interesting headboard or wall treatment, and some layered lighting. And the hallway outside might only be a few feet wide, but with a runner, a wall sconce, and a mirror, it suddenly feels designed. The problem is, most people stop at 1 point of interest, maybe 2. They put in the bed and call the room done, or they get a sofa and the TV. But that's why their space feels unfinished, even if those individual items are nice, because they're not giving the eye 3 reasons to stay. And this is where the rule of 3 really earns its keep. Because once a room has 3 clear anchors, it doesn't just look better, it feels better. It stops feeling accidental and starts feeling intentional. And that shift, more than anything else, is what most people interpret as expensive. But they're wrong, because what people think is an expensive price tag is actually just a room with a strong foundation. Because when a room is properly anchored, when nothing feels random or unfinished, it feels complete. And the confidence that comes with that completeness is what people mistake for luxury. And that's why 2 anchor rooms always feel a little off, even when the furniture is high-end. You can sense that something is missing, even if you can't name it. And it's also why adding more stuff almost never fixes the problem, because you don't need more pieces. You need the right third piece for the job. And this is also why big budgets don't automatically equal good design, because when there's no foundation, more money just adds noise. But when the foundation is right, even the most modest pieces start to feel elevated. A simple sofa, one good light, and a properly sized rug will always outperform a room that's full of expensive furniture, but still empty where it matters. So if you walk into a room and it feels flat, ask yourself, which 3 things are doing the visual work here? If you can only name 1 or 2, that's the problem. Now, quick clarification before we move on here. The rule of 3 doesn't mean all 3 things should compete for attention. It just means they all need to exist. And once they do, only one should lead while the other 2 support it. Because mistake number 2 that's making your home look worse than it should is that it has no clear priorities. And this is where a lot of rooms fall apart. Because even when the right pieces are there, nothing is clearly in charge. Because the rule of 3 is about your foundation, and it makes sure your room has the fundamental pieces in place. But priorities are about order. They decide how your eye experiences those pieces, what matters first, and what supports it. And you need both, because without a foundation, a room feels empty. But without priorities, everything starts competing for your attention. So once a room has the right anchors, the next question becomes, which one is in charge? But most people don't design like this on purpose. They let it happen accidentally. The TV becomes the focal point because it's big. The brightest light steals the attention because it's overhead. And a random piece of art dominates the room because it's super high contrast or just poorly placed. But that's not design. That's falling victim to our default behavior. But the way you take control of this is through framing. Because framing is how you tell someone, without saying a word, this is the most important part of the room. It's using the other things in the room to quietly pull your attention to one spot. So a sofa and 2 chairs can be positioned to point attention toward a coffee table. A rug can visually emphasize a seating area. A pair of lamps can draw the eye to a bed. And even negative space can act as a frame when you stop trying to fill every inch and let an area breathe. When framing is done well, the room becomes easy to understand. You walk in and immediately know where you're meant to sit, what you're meant to look at, and what part of the room matters most. And so nothing feels accidental or confusing. But when framing is ignored, the opposite happens. There's no clear priority, so your attention just keeps jumping from one thing to another, and the room feels unsettled. And this is a big part of the reason why copying rooms from Instagram rarely works, because you see the objects in the room, but you don't see the invisible decisions. What's being emphasized, what's being downplayed, and what's quietly guiding your eye. So if you walk into a room and it feels busy or confusing, ask yourself this: what's the first thing my eye is supposed to land on? If you can't answer that immediately, or if 3 different things come to mind, you don't have a style problem, you have a priorities problem. Now, mistake number 3 is you've designed your home to be looked at, not to be used. So a lot of people think interior design is static, where furniture sits, how things line up, and how the room looks in a photo. But real rooms aren't experienced from one fixed angle. You move through them. You enter, cross, turn, sit, stand, and leave. And when a room doesn't respect that movement, it feels off because it's got no flow. Now, flow is how easily your body moves through a space without thinking about it. When flow is good, everything feels natural. But when flow is bad, you feel it immediately, even if you can't explain why. You bump into furniture, walkways feel tight, chairs are awkward to pull out, and certain paths get avoided entirely. And most of that never shows up in photos, but it absolutely shows up in real life. Because flow isn't something you hope happens, it's something you design by deciding where people should move, pause, and pass through. But so many people push everything to the edges of their rooms, thinking it creates more space. But in reality, it often does the opposite, because the center of the room becomes empty but useless, and the edges of the room feel heavy. And as a result, the room stops working as a single connected space. But good flow creates invisible paths. The rug suggests where you walk, furniture orientation shows you how to enter and exit, and lighting reinforces those paths by subtly pulling you forward. So think of it like this. Priorities tell you what matters, and flow tells you how to move between those things. So if your room feels awkward, ask yourself this: am I walking through this space smoothly, or do I have to think to get through here? If you're sidestepping furniture, avoiding certain paths, or squeezing through spaces, you've got a flow problem. Now, mistake number 4 is the one that quietly ruins everything else, because most people think interior design is about adding. You add a sofa, add chairs, add pillows and art and plants, and when the room still feels off, the instinct is always the same. Let's add one more thing. But that instinct is the problem, because good interior design isn't created by adding, it's revealed through editing. And editing is the act of deciding what actually deserves to stay, what's doing real work in the room, and what's just there because it seemed like a good idea at the time. And this is where so many beginner spaces fail, because editing requires undoing decisions you already made, not making new ones. And that's why instead of removing, most beginners just add more, and the room keeps filling up when it should be settling down. Now, the issue isn't that any one addition is bad, it's that too many not quite right decisions have piled up without ever being questioned. And so the room doesn't necessarily look messy, it just starts to feel heavy, unfocused, and strangely exhausting to be in. But to be clear, editing doesn't mean stripping a room bare. It means setting clear priorities through restraint, letting one chair be the chair, letting one wall stay quiet, and letting everything that's not anchoring the space take a step back. And here's the part most people miss. Until you edit, none of the earlier fixes you made really show up. Because when a room hasn't been edited, the foundation gets buried, the focal point loses its strength, and even good flow breaks down because circulation paths start filling up again. So if you want a simple test, do this. Remove one thing from your room and don't replace it. If the room feels lighter and easier to be in, that thing wasn't decoration, it was friction. Editing is the step most people avoid because it doesn't feel productive, but it's also the step that separates rooms that look okay from rooms that actually feel right. But why is all of this so important when it comes to designing a beautiful space? Because interior design isn't about talent, it's about attention. Most people assume good design is something you either have or you don't, like some kind of natural instinct. But what actually separates homes that feel right from homes that feel off is much simpler than that. It's knowing what to look for. And once you understand these mistakes, you start seeing your space differently. You stop reacting to how a room feels and start understanding why it feels that way. You're no longer guessing, you're diagnosing. You notice when a room feels flat because it's missing a third anchor. You notice when it feels chaotic because nothing has clear priority. You notice when it feels awkward because it wasn't designed for movement. And you notice when it still doesn't work because nothing was ever edited out. And that awareness changes everything. Because instead of buying random pieces and hoping they fix the problem, you start making intentional decisions. You know what the room needs, and just as importantly, what it doesn't. And again, this is the part most people underestimate. Once you learn to see these things, you can't unsee them. Every space starts to make sense. Not just your own home, but hotel rooms, restaurants, friends' apartments. You start noticing why certain places feel elegant even when they're not expensive. And that's not taste, that's understanding. And the upside to this is huge. You save money because you stop chasing fixes that don't address the real issue. You save time because you're not constantly second-guessing yourself. And your home starts to feel good. Not because you added more, but because you finally know what matters. So if there's one takeaway from this video, it's this. Great design isn't about doing more. It's about doing the right things in the right order. So if you appreciate this more thoughtful approach to design, share this video with someone you know who also loves beautiful spaces. And if you want to dive deeper into these ideas, click the link in the description and drop in your email. Some of my best stuff only gets shared with my email subscribers, so you don't want to miss it. And now that you know why your home doesn't look as good as it could, it's time to change that. So watch this video next where I'll show you how to take a below average room and transform it into a space you'll never want to leave.